Watch this.
All right, let's talk about the 10 Rastakhan's Rumble cards that get the thumbs up from me. These are the best cards in the expansion so far. At the number 10 spot here, we have Undasta, who saw a lot of play early in this expansion's meta with things like Odd Warrior, running it with other big beasts like Amani Warbear. Also in Death Rattle Hunter, this card was added to summon things like King Crush from hand to create lots of board swing because Undasta kills something, and then you get an 8/8 charger as well that can even do some damage. So anytime there are beast synergies to be utilized, it seems like Undasta is going to be a pretty good fit. And I think that is something we'll see in the future. Beasts are a very common tribe in Hearthstone, and they often see a lot of play. So Undasta, although losing a little bit of steam today in the Hearthstone meta, a card that's already proven itself, and I think will continue to look good for a while. Up next at the number 9 spot, hey, we have a beast, just like all the other Loas, but not really one that needs to be used with Undasta. Shirvala, of course, gets discounts of her own, so pretty easy to play from hand for low mana cost, even 0. Most notably played in things like OTK Holy Wrath Paladin, where that 25 mana cost came in handy. But beyond that, Shirvala is just a card that feels good to play pretty often. It typically takes a really good trade onto the board, killing something fairly big while staying around. Also, the lifesteal can be really nice to gain a ton of life back, helping you stabilize in a control deck. So that flexibility for both a specific combo style, but also just general utility makes Shirvala a really nice card. Moving on to the number 8 spot here, we have Crowd Roaster, a card that's a little surprising to me, but turns out things like Odd Warrior with a Dragon Focus or Dragon Priest can use Crowd Roaster pretty successfully. It creates lots of big swing opportunities. Kill a big thing, play a thing. So even though the health might look low, the numbers are perhaps a tad awkward for mana cost, and even that 7 damage that it deals, turns out often that's just enough to make this thing feel playable, and that's why those decks are able to run it. And I guess if we're going to see Dragon decks in the future, I think Crowd Roaster will become a prominent part of those decks moving forward. So it turns out I was wrong. This is a pretty solid card. Moving on to the number 7 spot here, we have Mojo Master Zihi, neutral legendary, and really the closest thing to like the go-to neutral legendary of this set, like we saw, with Zilliax or cards like the Lich King in the past. Zihi, though, is not quite that just raw power level sort of thing. This is more of a utility or tech card that can be really helpful to answer things like OTK decks where they need their full mana to pull off their combo. Zihi can disrupt that, give you more time to kill them, stall them, just ruin their game plan. And that's why this card is being included in a handful of different control or sometimes even decks to give them a chance against OTK when they otherwise wouldn't. And I think that will probably continue into the future. This card just has some sneaky use cases, so it looks good now, and I think it's going to look good for a while. Moving on to number 6 here, we have the Mosh Og Enforcer, and I really never thought this card would make a list like this, and it frankly wouldn't have if I'd made this video a few weeks earlier. But with the rise of Wall Priest becoming a tier 1 deck and Mosh Og Enforcer being such a key component of that deck, this card is now seeing a lot of play on the Hearthstone ladder, and it's turning out to be a pretty reliable thing. Even if you just slam it on turn 8, it often feels good. And then in combination with Master Oakheart or Resurrection effects or buffs like Divine Spirit Inner Fire, Mosh Og Enforcer becomes a really, really scary and sometimes frustrating sort of threat. So, you know what? I think this card has merits on its own. It certainly fits with other pieces really nicely, and it's even been played in things like Druid too, so it's not just a priest sort of card. For that reason, it has to be included on the list. At the number 5 spot here, we have Master's Call. And as for this one's success, it's pretty simple. It's good card draw for Hunter, something it has always lacked. Getting 3 beasts for 3 mana is a really good and efficient sort of card draw too. And because Hunter likes playing beasts, particularly cheap beasts that you can play immediately, things like Spring Paws and Timber Wolves and even Scavenging Hyenas, that can be a really crazy combo that you draw into quickly. You can also occasionally get some big threats just to continue you into the mid game. Whatever the case, filling in that gap for Hunter gave it a lot of power in the Rastakhan era, and even in the post-nerf world, Master's Call still seeing play. Beast-based Hunters are still rather successful, and it comes down to this card right here. And as good as Master's Call is, I actually think Spring Paw is a little bit better and more important for Hunter just because it gets them off to those ridiculously fast starts, and it combines so insanely well with Scavenging Hyena. a card that's really just stealing games for Hunter right now and contributing to their win rate in a really crazy way. Because if you can get a couple early Spring Paw and Lynx plays and trade them in with a Scavenging Hyena on board, you're looking at a 6/4 minion on like turn 3. And that can be absolutely ridiculous, particularly because the rush aspect of Spring Paw makes that happen immediately, but it also trades into whatever your opponent played early. So you're reducing their ability to kill your stuff. Those big plays are winning a lot of Hearthstone games. And beyond that, Spring Paw is just good with other follow-ups like Crackling Razor Maw on turn 2. It gives Hunter that really consistent way to play something early, but it's still good in a pinch too, right? Even on like turn 8, you can play this. You can Crackling Razor Maw it with Poisonous and take a trade into a Lich King, right? So it has that early game power, the swing potential thanks to Hyena, and even some late game utility occasionally as well. Combine all that together, and you have basically the perfect early game minion for Hunter. At the number 3 spot here, I have Mass Hysteria for Priest. Great 5-mana removal spell. I didn't really think this one would work all that well, but it turns out it's created a lot of opportunity for Priest as that very powerful mid-game removal. Typically, they had to wait until turn 7 with Psychic Scream to really handle aggressive early game boards. They had a few other options, things like Duskbreaker, but that makes you have to go into Dragons. Holy Nova often just didn't do enough, but Mass Hysteria gets you there. It can work against different boards. It can 2 8/8s. Mass Hysteria is great, right? A bunch of small stuff, Mass Hysteria can still work nicely. So it's that perfect removal option. And I think that's one of the main reasons we're seeing so many control and combo Priest decks thrive right now, because this card gives them that survivability and late game depth that they need to handle any sort of aggression. So this has really pushed us into one of the more dominant Priest metas we've had in the last year or so. There's Priest everywhere, and it's because of Mass Hysteria. So I really don't think its impact or importance in the meta can be understated. So although surprising to me, a little bit sad that I admit my defeat here on saying this card wasn't going to be that good, nonetheless, pretty darn good. And then moving into the number 2 spot, look, it's another Hunter card. This time around, Zul'jin, the lone hero card for Rastakhan's Rumble. Clearly one of the most impactful and insanely powerful cards in the expansion. When it hits the board, it's often doing ridiculous things, summoning a full board of minions, clearing your opponent's stuff, playing 5 secrets, drawing you cards. We've all been impacted by those game-winning Zul'jin swing turns. It just does everything very, very quickly. And that's always going to be a powerful thing to see in Hearthstone. Now, admittedly, Zul'jin, after the most recent round of nerfs, has not been nearly as popular as he was beforehand when Spell Hunter and Secret Hunter varieties were dominating the Hearthstone ladder. But despite that, still a playable card, still a strong card, and I'm sure a card that will remain relevant in Hunter for a long time to come just because of that swing potential. Secrets alone sometimes make this worth it. So even if you don't have a spell package necessarily, just having spells is going to make Zul'jin good. And Rexar is going to be rotating out, so that hero card slot opens up. For that reason, I think this card's going to be a prominent part of Hunter for the next year or so or whatever. And that's why Zul'jin is here at the number 2 spot. Really one of the best cards of the set. But I did reserve the top spot here for Jan'alai the Dragonhawk. And that's because Zul'jin has lost a little bit of steam in the last few weeks, but Jan'alai is actually gaining ground. So despite being played a lot on day 1 in Mage decks, Jan'alai is being played even more here on day 65 or whatever we are in the expansion. This is a card that's gonna be good in Mage because it's a cheaper Ragnaros, and Ragnaros was one of the best cards in Hearthstone for a long, long time. It got played by everybody. Jan'alai does that, but she does it for 7 mana, and she attaches a 4/4 body. So you know there's a precedence, there's a history here set for how good this card can be. And when things like really aggressive odd mage decks are tossing in Jan'alai, when control odd mage decks are tossing in Jan'alai, when regular mage just control decks are tossing in Jan'alai, clearly this card's a fit for everyone. It can be the top end in an aggressive deck. It can be a value piece in a control deck. it's just universally good, hyper flexible, not that hard to activate. Like that is one kind of check on this card is you do need the hero powers, but you'll eventually get there, particularly with cards like Daring Fire Eater rotating right alongside Jan'alai. It's always going to have that partner in crime. So this card to me really does stand out as the very best. It's the most consistent. It's reliable. It's being played almost more than any other card in Rastakhan's Rebel. It might actually be number one right now if I look. So all of that is just good, clear evidence that Jan'alai belongs at the number one spot, the very best card in Rastakhan's Rumble so far. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up. Those are my 10 best Rastakhan's Rumble cards. Of course, I used some data from sites like HS Replay here to guide the decision and direction a lot of these cards, but I also used some subjectivity. I think impact and power of cards weighed on my decision a little bit, not just strictly things like played rate. So for instance, Zul'jin may be a little higher than his current day played rate would suggest, but he's just such a strong and impactful card and he can win games outright that I think that's worth something. And that's why he's probably higher on this list than he might be for you. That said, I want to hear what your take is. What cards would you have included on this list? Which ones wouldn't have made the list in your eyes? Share those thoughts in the comments below. But until then, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.